April 1945, Merkers, Germany. The war was almost over. Everyone knew it. But the smell hit them before they even reached the gate. Not smoke, not gunpowder. Sweat, rot, human waste baked into stone walls. The soldiers moving through the facility slowed down without being told to. Their boots crunched over something, broken glass, scattered tools, things that had been dropped and never picked up. Then one of them turned a corner and stopped. Against the far wall, barely standing, were men. What was left of them? Hollow eyes, skin pulled tight over bone, hands that had been worked until the fingerprints were gone. They weren't prisoners anymore. They were evidence. At the entrance, a black staff car sat waiting. Inside, a German general, pressed uniform, polished buttons, watched through the window with calm, patient eyes. His paperwork was already prepared. He expected a conversation. General George S. Patton arrived on foot. He didn't look at the car. He looked at the men against the wall. Patton stopped. Then he sighed. What happened next wasn't in any official report, but the men who were there never forgot it. This is what he did. We tell stories where disrespect meets consequences. Subscribe, because history's most powerful moments never made the textbooks. General Heinrich Brauer had survived the entire war on paperwork, not on the front, not in the mud, in offices, in requisition orders, in the careful language of bureaucracy that turned human beings into labor units. He was not a man who shouted. He didn't need to. Power, in his world, moved quietly, through signatures, through transfers, through the movement of names from one list to another. By 1944, his facility in Merkers was processing something more valuable than soldiers. Salt mines, deep ones, miles of tunnels carved into the earth below the Thuringian hills, and to work those tunnels, Brauer had made requests. Formal requests, stamped and approved. Workers were delivered. Not volunteers, not paid laborers, concentration camp prisoners. Soviet POWs. Civilians pulled from occupied towns. They arrived thin. They left thinner if they left at all. Inside those tunnels, they moved gold, crates of it. Nazi Reich gold, looted art, foreign currency reserves, the financial skeleton of a crumbling empire, moved underground by hands that would never touch a single coin. Brauer ate his meals in a villa 2 kilometers from the mine entrance. White tablecloth, local wine. A portrait of the Führer on the wall, though by April 1945 it had been quietly turned to face the corner. He had already written his surrender terms. He expected them to be respected. Because in his mind, he had simply been doing his job. I managed resources, he would later say. That is all. He didn't use the word people. He never did. When Patton's advance unit entered Merkers on April 4th, they weren't expecting the mines. They were chasing a tip. A rumor passed between 2 displaced women on a road outside town. Something about gold, something about tunnels, something about Billy very deep. What they found was larger than anyone had been told. 2,000 feet underground, behind a dynamite-sealed door, sat the financial reserves of the Third Reich. 8,000 gold bars. Hundreds of millions in foreign currency. Paintings. Sculptures. Items stripped from Jewish families across Europe, rings, watches, eyeglasses, melted down or boxed and cataloged with the same bureaucratic precision that Brauer applied to everything. But that wasn't what stopped Patton's men at the entrance. It was the workers' barracks, built into the outer tunnels. Low ceilings, no light, no ventilation. The walls had been scratched, not randomly, with intention. Names, dates, languages. None of the American soldiers could read. Someone had used a piece of iron to carve letters into stone, slowly in the dark. One of Patton's sergeants crouched down and ran his finger along the marks. Sir, his voice came out wrong. Someone lived here, not stayed, lived. Past tense. The sleeping platforms were boards over stone. Each base barely shoulder width. The straw had been there so long it had composted into the floor. A mess tin, a single spoon, a child's wooden button. The soldiers moved through without speaking. Outside, in the holding area near the main entrance, 31 surviving workers had been gathered. Some could stand, some couldn't. A Red Cross worker was moving between them, her face white and controlled in the way faces get when a person decides not to cry until later. One man, Polish, the interpreter said, had been underground for 14 months. 14 months without sunlight. His eyes couldn't focus on the open sky. He kept turning away from it. The interpreter asked him something. The man answered slowly. He says he thought the sun would feel different. No one asked what he meant. Everyone understood. Then, from the staff car near the gate, the door opened. General Brauer stepped out, perfectly dressed, hands clasped in front of him. "I would like to speak with the commanding officer," he said in careful English. He was smiling, slightly. The smile of a man who believes the conversation is already going his way. Behind him, framed in the mine entrance, the Polish man was still turning away from the light. Patton was 50 feet away. He had heard everything. He didn't move yet. Patton walked past Brower without stopping, straight to the workers. He stood in front of them for a long time. His jaw was set. His hands were behind his back. He wasn't performing anything. He wasn't making a speech. He was just looking, taking it in, making himself see it fully. Then he turned to his interpreter, asked them where they came from. The answers came in pieces. Poland, Hungary, Ukraine, a town in France, a village in the Soviet Union that no longer existed. Asked them how long. The numbers were worse than the faces. 18 months, 2 years. One man held up 3 fingers and the interpreter's voice lightly when he translated it. 3 years underground. Patton said nothing for a moment. Then he walked to Brower. The German general straightened. He extended a hand. Patton looked at it the way you look at something you've decided not to touch. You ran this facility. Not a question. I administered it, yes. General, I want to assure you, how many workers came through here? Brower paused, calculating. Several thousand over the course of operations. And how many left? Silence. Patton turned to his aide. Get me his full documentation, every transfer order, every requisition, every name he signed. Brower's voice shifted, less smooth now. General, under the terms of you don't have terms. Patton's voice didn't rise. It dropped. Quiet is more dangerous than loud, and everyone near him felt it. You have paperwork. That's all you have. He turned away from Brower and back toward the mine entrance. I want every living worker documented, he said to his medical officer. Names, conditions, everything. Then, almost to himself, make sure they know we found them. Brower made his appeal that afternoon. He had prepared it carefully. He cited the Geneva Convention. He cited his rank. He cited his cooperation with the surrender process. I was an administrator, he said, not a soldier, not a combatant. I asked to be treated accordingly. Patton let him finish. Then he said 2 sentences. You treated men like equipment. I'm going to treat you like the evidence you are. He ordered Brower photographed, not in his uniform, in front of the barracks, in front of the scratched names on the walls, in front of the men he had used. And then Patton did the thing that none of Brower's calculations had accounted for. He ordered the documentation reversed. Every paper Brower had filed, every clean, stamped, bureaucratically perfect transfer order was pulled from the facility records and handed to the War Crimes Unit, his own signature, on every page. The careful language that had turned people into labor units now became the evidence that turned a general into a war criminal. Brower stood very still when he understood what was happening. The smile was gone. Patton was already walking back toward his jeep when one of his officers asked quietly, "Should we say anything to him, sir?" Patton didn't slow down. He'll have plenty of time to talk at Nuremberg. The workers were moved to a medical facility outside Merkers within 48 hours. Most of them had never expected to be moved anywhere, not alive. The Red Cross worker who had been at the gate, her name was Marguerite, a Swiss volunteer from Geneva, wrote in her field notes that first night, they keep asking if they are allowed to sleep, as if rest requires permission now. For some of them, it did. Years underground had rewired something. They would startle awake at random sounds. They ate slowly, suspiciously, in the way of people who had learned that meals could be taken away. But there were other moments. The Polish man, the one who couldn't face the sunlight, sat outside the medical tent on the second morning. Someone had brought him a blanket. He had it pulled around his shoulders even though it was April and not cold. A young American private sat down near him. Neither spoke the other's language. The private offered a cigarette. The man took it. They sat there together for a while, looking at the same patch of open sky. The man tilted his face toward the sun. Slowly, eyes still closed. He didn't turn away this time. Inside the mine, Patton's documentation teams worked for days. The gold was inventoried. The looted art was cataloged. Each piece traced, where possible, back to an origin, a gallery, a family, a name. The names on the tunnel walls were photographed and recorded. Each one entered into the official record, not as a labor unit, as a person. Brower was processed to the American military justice system and transferred to the International Military Tribunal. His documentation, the very files he had maintained with such precision, formed a significant portion of the forced labor case at the Nuremberg trials. He had kept perfect records. It destroyed him. Other officers, under interrogation, pointed to him as the model of how the system worked, not through violence but through paperwork, through the removal of language that acknowledged humanity. The facility at Merker's was sealed after the valuables were removed and transferred to Frankfurt for safekeeping. But before it was closed, Patton ordered one final thing: the names scratched into the tunnel walls. He ordered them preserved. Photographed, yes, but also left untouched. "Don't clean it," he said. "Don't paint over it." He stood at the entrance of the tunnel for a moment before turning away. That wall is the only honest record this place ever made. This wasn't just a story about a gold mine. It wasn't even really about Brower. It was about the distance between a signature and a life. Brower never fired a weapon, never stood over a prisoner. He sat at a desk and wrote numbers into boxes, and somewhere at the end of those numbers, human beings disappeared into the dark. That's the part history doesn't like to hold on to, that the worst machinery doesn't always make noise. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it wears a press uniform and speaks in careful language and believes, completely, that it has done nothing wrong. Patton understood something that afternoon that doesn't fit on a monument. He understood that mercy has a cost, that the man asking for it is not always the one who most deserves it. The people who scratched their names into that wall, they never got to ask for anything. They just hoped someone would find the marks they left. Patton made sure someone did. That's what he said without saying it. Some walls are the only honest record a place ever makes. Here's what I want you to sit with. Brower had the language, the titles, the formal process, everything that power is supposed to look like. And he used all of it, every bit of it, to make suffering invisible on paper. So ask yourself honestly, what do you do when the cruelty is bureaucratic? When it has a stamp and a signature and a legal framework around it? At what point does following orders become the crime? Drop your answer in the comments. Seriously, I read every one. And if this kind of story matters to you, the ones where power meets its actual consequence, subscribe. We find the moments that got buried and we bring them back up because some things deserve to be in the record.